Welcome back. New York City released a new law commonly referred to as Local Law 18 that requires short-term rental hosts on apps like Airbnb to register with the City of New York before they can accept any payments. In response to these new restrictions, many small homeowners are pushing back. Joining us to discuss the impact of this law on homeowners is Linda Ortiz, a member of the organization Restore Homeowner Autonomy and Rights. Linda, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for creating this opportunity for us.
Of course. So, what is the overall mission and goal of your organization, RHOAR?
So yes, our mission and goals is to make sure that our rights and autonomy are returned to one and two family homeowner occupied homes like the one that I own here in the Bronx. And so we are a coalition of homeowners that would like for, sorry.
It's okay, yeah. So, that was really great. So I want to talk about Local Law 18
Yes.
because I definitely want to make sure that your organization is not against Local Law 18, but you do have some things that was concerning to you. Can you just explain, how this new law affects small homeowners like yourself?
Yeah, sure. So Local Law 18 was drafted to deal with bad actors, people that were renting many apartments and putting them on the market for Airbnb in apartment buildings, multi-dwellings. And unfortunately, the impacts of LL18, the Local Law 18, is wrapping up one and two homeowners, one and two family homeowners within the legislation. And so hopefully we're seeking is that we get a carve out or an amendment modification to the legislation that's adversely impacting small homeowners in the intent of the original legislation.
Now, I'm curious to know, what are some reasons a homeowner may look into short-term rental business?
Sure. That's a great question. And I see it as not so much a business, but a way to survive. Costs of utilities have gone up. Insurance for homes, I don't know if you know, but they've tripled this year alone. And so it's a means of survival, just like any other New Yorker with the need for additional income would take advantage of. Yeah.
Now, what is the registration process like? Because as I mentioned that, a lot of these homeowners are now going to be required to register with the City of New York. What is that process like? And, could this be a challenge for some homeowners? Basically, what are some obstacles associated with registering if you are interested in the short term, rental area of, like, as you mentioned, trying to survive?
So the challenges in this, home sharing registration process with the City of New York is quite cumbersome. And so there's an agency we need to sign up, which is the Office of Special Enforcement. And it requires a lot of additional steps. So people say, well, if you're doing the right thing, just register. And that process may, at face value, appear super easy and accessible, but it's not. It creates a lot of hurdles for small homeowners that require meeting guidelines and certain laws created by Department of Buildings and the Housing Maintenance Code that we're not necessarily privy to. And so there's some hurdles that we need to go through in order to properly register with the City of New York.
Now, a representative from RHOAR said this law resulted in homeowners feeling as though they lost autonomy over their homes. Can you just expand why many homeowners are feeling this way? And of course, when you saw the news that this was something that was going to happen, how did that make you feel as well as a homeowner?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, there's obstacles to the registration process. And so while it seems clear and cut, once an individual, a homeowner, begins the process of registering, they find that their units do not qualify for participation in the home sharing economy because there have been changes to the city housing maintenance codes, changes to the Department of Buildings rules and regulations that often are done with little to no public public hearings or public process. So we're finding out as we are taking these initial steps.
And then can you just talk about, I thought this was really, because, I never thought of it this way before as like a means to, possibly help with, owning a home in New York City is like a huge deal. And I know although it's a huge accomplishment, it can be stressful for a lot of homeowners. So you can just talk about that experience and, how maybe not having access to this, how is that going to affect the livelihood of so many of these homeowners?
Yeah, so homeownership is super diverse. It can be that you inherited the property from your parents. It can be that you bought a very, very long time ago, you raised your children, and now you're an empty nester. It could be that you are a divorcee, and you have the house and you're alone in the house. So the home sharing economy allows for people with single income, divorcees, widows, and folks that are retired to gain a little bit of income to keep living in New York. The old model was, well, after you hit 60, you retire, you sell your house, and you move out of state. Well, people are staying in New York. Their families are in New York. We're the fabric of this city. I don't want to sell my house because I can no longer afford to live in New York City when there are avenues where I can access additional income in order to be able to continue living in the city that I was born in.
Now, a major concern for your organization is that homeowners are facing the same role as large corporate landlords who have been associated with running illegal hotels. Can you expand on that concern?
I think that's where the waters get murky, right? Unlike building owners and big landlords, homeowners have one unit in their apartment, on their property, or a couple of rooms for home sharing. And so when this legislation began in September, this past couple of weeks ago, we certainly felt the impacts right away. For us, it's a means of survival. The difference between a multi-dwelling unit is apartments can stay empty and the landlord doesn't necessarily have to fill them, and nor does he feel the impact of the loss of income. Whereas in 1 and 2 family homes, we certainly feel the impact right away. And there are people who are scared to lose their homes in the next couple of months.
And I also want to kind of reiterate that when we speak to people who are like, oh, well, yeah, just, go through the process. It is very important to make the distinction between landlords who have multiple units.
Absolutely.
Versus a homeowner. So can you just kind of pinpoint that one more time, just to make that distinction and how it's not the same and how you guys are not affected the same?
Sure. So when landlords or people living in a residential building put their apartments on Airbnb, the landlord doesn't necessarily live there. The impacts of that apartment, either paying rent or not paying rent, is not as it's not as impactful as, let's say, a 1 or 2 family home.
Right.
So in my case, if my tenant stopped paying rent, I would feel it in that following month when I would have to pay the utilities, gas, electric, water, and everything else associated with the expenses of the home. And so we are being put in the same bucket, but we function very, very, very differently.
Now, can you, your organization is hoping to see new legislation to modify Local Law 18. So once again, you're not against it, but you just want to see it modified. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that effort?
Sure. So in terms of modification, we are asking for full exempt of 1 and 2 family homes from Local Law 118. And why? Because we're not large buildings. We are not landlords. We are just small homeowners trying to make a living in New York City, like everything else. We are in agreement with Local Law 18 and the intent of the law. They are unscrupulous, bad actors who have taken advantage of housing, in New York. We are not those. We are very careful in who we invite into our homes. Visitors and tourists are staying inside my home. And so, I'm inviting them into my community. And so I'm very careful on who I invite, and who I host. So I clearly understand why Local Law 18 was drafted, and in complete agreement of again, its intent. But there has to be some sort of a critical lens on this, and some analysis that one and two family occupied homeowners are not landlords, and we are not buildings.
And, you know, I really love that you meant, like, you kind of talk about safety a little bit, because I know that was a concern for others. And, you know, you mentioned it's in your home, and you're bringing people into your community, and you're mindful of that. Whereas I'm assuming maybe people who don't live in the community, who own these buildings, aren't thinking the same way you are thinking. So I think that was like really important that you shared that, because I know a lot of people are probably thinking like, oh yeah, like you're seeing new people in your neighborhood. And so if you're living with them for that short a period of time, you want to hope that you're safe as well. So I appreciate you talking about that.
Absolutely. So other than, inviting people, I want to curate an experience for them. And, frankly speaking, so my home in the Bronx, I'm a native Bronx girl, born and bred in the Bronx. And most tourists that come and visit New York, frankly speaking, Bronx is not part of the itinerary. Right? It's just, unless they're going to a game in Yankee Stadium or visiting the zoo. So when they do stay with me, they do ask, is it safe?
Right.
Yeah. And they walk away with, I'm coming back to the Bronx. This was an amazing experience. And so it adds to the fabric of our microeconomies within our neighborhoods.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Sure. Thank you.
To learn more about this or help support RHOAR NYC's fight, with Local Law 18, please go to their website at www.roar.org. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this.